Hello, world singers. My name is Tyler.
And my name is Brooke.
And this is
It's
Cosmere Conversations.
We are so excited to have a couple of guests on the podcast with us today. We've got Lydia Suen, the lead writer of the Cosmere RPG, and Lyla McBeath Fujiwara, who is the Stonewalkers Adventure Book Lead, both from Brotherwise. Welcome, Lydia and Lyla.
Thank you.
Hello.
It is really exciting to have both of you on the podcast today, or very near to listener when you are getting this delivered to you, is the digital launch of the Cosmere RPG.
Woohoo!
Yes, very much woohoo. And the Stonewalker campaign specifically, which is what both of you have spent a very long time working on. So first, congratulations to you and the entire team at Brotherwise. No, it has been a lot of labor, a labor of love we hope to hear about, but just a lot of work in general, all coming to the forefront today. And it's been a lot of fun to experience these things bit by bit. There was the Bridge 9 campaign that released last year. Some of the people who were at Dragonsteel Nexus in 2024 were able to play things like one-shots. And it has just been wonderful to witness this moment, a long time coming and finally here. Before we jump too deep into the Cosmere RPG realms, I would love to start us off the same way we do with all of our guests, which is to just ask, who's your favorite character in the Cosmere, and or are you aligned with an order of Knight Radiant? And Lydia, would you like to start us off with those questions?
Sure. My favorite character changes sometimes. Right now, it's Yanagon after what we've seen in World Truth. Love him. And my order is Elf Scholar. It's sometimes a heavy calling to work on yourself a lot, but I can't help it, and it's something I love. So, yeah, I feel a lot of connection to the order, and it's kind of funny, but I feel like it's taught me a lot about myself and different challenges I face and different roads to overcoming them. So it's been kind of fun, like little life coach,
I love that.
And Lyla, what about you?
Yeah. I hope this isn't like too basic of a pick, but my favorite character is Adolin or Adeline, as it's said in my head. I really like the story of somebody who's kind of a normie next to all these superheroes. Like, I really liked the beginning of the books when people were discovering their powers and kind of like disempowered and figuring out just like really scrappy ways to do things. And having Adelin's story kind of like flipped on its head, where he's this really powerful, privileged person in the beginning, and then like his, wife and best friend are these mega, superheroes, and he's, but he's holding his own without, having access to, all the radiant powers and things. So I just find that a very like interesting narrative story. As far as Order of Knight Radiance, I have taken the official quiz. Actually, a bunch of the team did in preparation for the Kickstarter. We were kind of all like sharing our paths. I got Windrunner, which I feel like is very basic. And I think basically like what I was reading through it and why it gave it to me is because it basically says that like you like to be on a team and like support and like uplift and help other people who are on the team with you. So I don't know if it's because I was thinking about the RPG when I was doing it or what happened, but I got Windrunners the highest with a Edge Dancer Rising, I say.
Nice.
Oh, I love that. I think that one of the cool things that Adeline, we'll use your pronunciation while we're here, is demonstrating are the blended nature of Spren bonds and also just whatever the unoathed are. And he is a mixed, not radiant, but a mixed shard bearer who is Stoneward and Edge Dancer. And so I love that concept of like the rising sign to kind of like match maybe some Windrunner tendencies that exist within you. And being part of a team, obviously a perfect segue for the discussion today on the Cosmere RPG. Of course, you're on the creating side. Many of the people listening are going to be on the player character or PC side. And we want to let everybody know kind of just like a general spoiler warning. Normally, we're hashtag all spoilers here on the podcast, but we are going to be keeping this conversation devoid of spoilers for Stonewalkers. So we're not going to just like go over the entire plot details of Stonewalkers, more about the background and building that story rather than the actual like, tell me what happens at the very end and then let's discuss. And also, we won't be talking about Isles of the Emberdark here, so I hope there's not too much crossover. But as that story came out after most of the work was done on Stonewalkers, I can't imagine you somehow slid in, but I don't know because I haven't gotten through Stonewalkers. And so that's where we will place our spoiler warning for everybody listening. And we think that it's just a great jumping off point for a bunch of fans who know the Cosmere, love Sanderson's work, and now get an opportunity to play out those stories.
Yeah, what an opportunity. I feel like, isn't that always the thing? You read a book that you love and you just want to be able to like live inside of it. And the fact that we are now kind of able to is so incredible. I would love to just start with a little bit of like background on both of you. Like, have you always been readers? Were you even into the Cosmere before you started working on this RPG? Have you always been gamers? Just like tell us a little bit about who you are and like how you got to work on the Cosmere RPG.
Yeah, I'll start us off. So, yeah, I guess I've always been into like nerdy stuff and fantasy. It came from my mom. She taught me how to play D&D, and I've been playing D&D since before I really knew the name or what the game was, but just like, telling a collaborative story where you're kind of controlling one of the characters in like a car trip. And then in middle school, that became getting the 3/3.5 books eventually. And I was our forever GM in high school. So I've just always loved role-playing games from a very like deep place in my heart. I also read a fair amount of fantasy, so I got really lucky. There was like kind of a confluence between me having been up to date on the Stormlight Archive and like really enjoying that series, and getting an opportunity to work for the team. I actually have two roles on the team. I wear a lot of hats on the team, but one of my roles and the one that I started with is the project lead role, which is more of like a project manager, people manager, operations-y kind of person. But at the same time, I'd been doing game design on the side and adventure writing, and I had my own little like indie game coming out on Kickstarter. And so when we were working on the adventure and we needed to like have somebody coordinating the revisions for that, I enthusiastically kind of hand raised for that. So that's how the adventure book lead role became part of my title. And there's a lot more I can fill in, but I think those are kind of like major points for why I am sitting here speaking into all of your ears.
Yeah, that's awesome. How about you, Lydia?
I have always been really into gaming and writing. Reading was a little bit more challenging for me because I am neurodivergent. I have ADHD and I had a learning disability as a child with reading in particular. So I struggled a lot with reading in elementary school. Toward the end, I got quite good at it, but in the beginning, I'd struggled a lot. And it was a lot easier for me to write than to read, which is interesting. I can't
Yeah.
explain why that is. It's just the way my neurodivergent brain functions. So I would write entire, like very cringeworthy fantasy novels on notebooks, in the fifth and sixth grade. And I would finish those before I would like finish a full fantasy book. Like I think in the sixth grade, I was reading like The Wayfarer's Redemption, which I would not recommend for kids that young, by the way. But yeah, so I guess my journey was very much more writing heavy than reading heavy in the beginning. And then as I got older, my reading disability kind of resolved, and then that got me a lot more into reading. After I studied business and communication, got like my responsible degree, I went and studied creative writing at Stanford, and that was really fun for me to be able to then like pursue my passion. And I learned a ton in that program and then became an editor after, which was really awesome. And I learned that, my brain's like subtle resistance to reading made me a really good editor because I could tell you exactly where I lost interest enough to
Yeah.
kind of check out. and then be able to like give really precise feedback on that. And so that was a really great few years of my life that I was an editor. And then I went into writing for TTRPGs, in particular world building, which is a huge passion of mine. Being like a person of color, you often see games that are kind of themed or coded for a culture that you're familiar with, and sometimes they're not done in a really authentic way. And people ask you like, oh, why didn't you play this game, because it's made for people like you or whatever, and you're like, actually it doesn't really like resonate very well. And I think that the industry is getting so much better about that now. And we've been really conscientious of that working on this project, especially because there are a lot of, on Roshar, there are a lot of cultures that are not direct one for one, with anywhere in our world, but draw a lot of inspiration from places in our world. So we had a large team of sensitivity editors who helped us out and made sure things kind of felt like they resonated in the way they should. Again, not one for one, but they felt like they were, more authentic and more, I'm trying to find the right word for it.
Maybe empowering? I don't
Yeah,
know.
more empowering narratives for sure. And like one thing we did is we tried to make sure that when you read about the different cultures in the Stormlight World Guide, you're reading about them as if somebody from that culture is telling you about their own culture, not
Oh,
somebody who's
interesting.
like visiting for a week and is just like, I
Yeah.
can tell you all about these people. They behave like this because they like this and value this, Instead, it's very much like, we're going to tell you why this matters to us, why we have policies like this,
Yeah.
why we are the way that we are. And we're also very very intentional about saying, people from various cultures, oftentimes their culture will have an impact on them in different ways, but like it's the person, not really the culture. It's like, how
Yeah.
does this person experience their culture, which parts of it resonates with them, which parts like don't, which is
Yeah. Because every
very
culture
fair.
is not a monolith.
Yeah.
And that's true of all of our Stormlight characters also. There's many different types of people, whether you're Rasharan or Iriali or whatever it is. So I love that that was something that was consciously put into the foundational materials of the game.
Yeah. Sorry, this is a really long answer.
No, I love
And then
it.
yeah, lifelong gamer. Grew up like reading with like Baldur's Gate 1 and
Nice.
whatnot. Very early games. My dad was a huge gamer and he played a lot of D&D, so he kind of got me into that. Not D&D specifically, but games like Baldur's Gate.
Sure.
At a young age, I started playing RPGs as I got older, and then I loved Guild Wars. That one was huge for me because it's like you just bought the game and it didn't have a subscription, and so like it was really friendly to like a teenage kid without a big budget. And then I loved finding super weird builds that worked, and they should not work, and nobody believed me that they worked until they saw me in action. And it's just like truly the most ridiculous thing. And it was great until certain abilities would get like completely nerfed because they
Yes,
were
of
being
course.
exploited by people like me. But
Yeah.
just always lifelong gamer, love living in fantasy worlds. So
Awesome.
There's always that person who's going to min max and find the weak points of the different systems, which is maybe like an interesting question that we can get to about how you deal with that in the Cosmere RPG, because I do think that you've developed a very interesting mechanic system. I believe either internally, I don't know if this is public, but it's called the Plotweaver system, right? That's the
mhm,
general Cosmere
yeah.
RPG system. And because one of the long-term promises is that we're starting on Roshar, but we are going to see this system applied to other worlds in the Cosmere. The kind of like underlying Plotweaver system will be replicated. Obviously, you have different abilities or different talents that we see throughout the different worlds. But I do want to keep us focused on Stonewalkers and the Stormlight RPG more generally. But could you help us maybe understand, and especially help members of our audience understand, what differentiates an RPG from more common board games or tabletop games, things like Monopoly or Catan that most people would have some exposure to? What's kind of like to you the different factor when it comes to an RPG? And Lyla, could we go over to you for that one?
Sure. I think that, like, well, one of the things that, like, visually is the same usually when you're playing a role playing game, if it's like a multiplayer game to a board game, is you have a bunch of your friends at a table, and there
Yes.
might really be some pieces and stuff in front of you. I think that, and there are components to it, like you're rolling dice and you're generally trying to beat up enemies, and maybe there's like kind of you're trying to win against some evildoers or whatever. But after that, the similarities diverge a little bit, and I'm trying to think, like when I explain to like older folks in my life who aren't aware of it, or just people who don't play role playing games, I often say it's like you get to control the actions of a character in a novel that you are writing with your friends. So you pick one of the main characters, you are that main character, and you kind of like write everything that they're doing in the novel, and then you have somebody else at the table that represents the rest of the world. It is called like the GM or the dungeon master if you're in D&D. So I think there's board games are pretty constrained. They have a very constrained set of rules, and they have win conditions that are usually quite clear, and like the actions you can take, you almost always have just like a list of actions you can take. And in a
Right.
role playing game, the things you can have your character do in the world are only limited by the imagination of what you say that you are attempting to do. I think another thing that's interesting, and there are definitely, board games have like a lot of different iterations and things, but winning in a role playing game oftentimes is like winning at a board game is usually competitive. It's sometimes collaborative, but like a lot of times it's competitive. Role playing games, at least ours, the Cosmere RPG is a collaborative game where everybody's kind of on the same team. And the way that you win is kind of by telling a really neat story. It's less about like, at least for me,
Yes.
it's less about getting a certain number of points or becoming particularly powerful. It is making memorable sort of story experiences that are kind of like improvised on the spot. And I want Lydia to also jump in and kind of say, but one thing that I want to say is, if this makes absolutely no sense to you, if you look up High Roller Cosmere One Shot, that is a one shot. So just a bunch of people coming together to play like through one short story that has a bunch of folks playing the Cosmere. There's other examples of videos and things that you can see online, but that's like a good example of what this looks like.
Yeah, we'll definitely link a couple of those one shots. I also know there's the Herdazian Hog Heist, which I always recommend because I love alliterations. And so, like, thumbs up to the team for choosing that one. But that was a great entry point to the Cosmere RPG and kind of like how it plays and what you can see. Going over to you, Lydia, do you have any other comments about the difference between tabletops or board games and RPGs, or if you want to expand a little bit more specifically to the Cosmere RPG, what makes it different from other RPGs like D&D, which is clearly the most popular and most well known by the broadest number of people?
Yeah, for sure. Lyla tackled the first question really well. With RPGs, the win condition is awesome. Was it awesome? Was it cool? And they're much more focused on storytelling. And very much to what she said, the idea that in board games, you are trying to claim space. You're trying to like take over space, whereas like in RPGs, you share space. So it's kind of a different experience. And folks who feel intimidated by the experience of playing like a fairly aggressive board game would probably love RPGs just because it can be what you want it to. Like there's so many different types of RPGs out there, and even within the same RPG, two groups might play it completely differently in terms of what kinds of stories they want to tell and how their groups work together. So there's lots of flexibility there. What makes a Cosmere RPG different than other popular RPGs? Such as D&D. There are a few things that make it different. Of course, we have our Plotweaver system, which I am a huge fan of. I really like flexible initiative and things like our plot die. Huge fans of those. So there's like different elements in the rules that are really cool, and a lot of folks may prefer. And then something that makes it different as well is a focus on character development and like your personal character story. In a lot of RPGs, there's this question of like player etiquette, like how much space is appropriate for any one person to take up with their character's backstory. Like there's always the jokes about the rogue who has a really long backstory, and
Very brooding at all times.
yes, and backstories are fun. They're really fun for writers. And then there's this question of like, oh, how much am I allowed to have the spotlight on my character in particular during the story, like how much is appropriate. And in a lot of RPGs like D&D, again, I think it depends on the group and like what their decision is together on what's appropriate. But everything's like much more focused on the party as a whole. Whereas in the Cosmere RPG, there is like clear designated space for your character to have some really pivotal moments, and everybody works together as a team and has cool like interactive moments with each other as well. But there definitely is clear designated space through goals and rewards and other parts of our game where it's like your character has a spotlight on them, and you're able to really show like some deep development and changes that they're going through. So I think the focus on character development is really there. The focus on like kind of introspection is there, and a lot of Brandon's magic systems really benefit from this focus on a specific person, kind of improving, whether it's like a radiant, improving their spren bond and like learning about themselves and like how, to progress in their ideals, or whether it's like a Mistborn training their various powers. Like there kind of does need to be some type of, self-improvement montage throughout the process. So I think it's cool that there's like designated space for that. So it always feels like the game can move on smoothly with everyone together, but people still really get their moment to be like, my character is having a intense and like important conversation with their spren right now.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. To your point of like the sort of flexibility of this game and this system, that's definitely something that has made it more interesting and I think accessible to me as a new RPG person. I love that the characters are so customizable, and I love that I can really make my character the exact like combination of different things that I want her to be, and she doesn't have to be sort of confined to just a, paladin or a rogue or like these archetypes that I think are more typical to RPGs. And you mentioned the plot die. I love the plot die. It makes failures just maybe a little bit softer, like you might fail your role, but then it's like, oh, but you got an opportunity. So you're like, okay, that's fine.
For sure. And like Lyla was saying, it's just it spices up the game, and as long as you have player buy-in, like everybody understands how the plot die works ahead of time. Like when you're playing the Cosmere RPG, you're really chasing like a very cool story. And so it's okay when bad things happen. Like when I was studying creative writing, it's like, oh, you got to put your character through it. Like they have to experience the worst of the worst, hit the dark night of the soul, and then it's like that's what makes the triumphs really meaningful. And
Yeah.
so I think a lot of people who read Brandon's works understand this whole give and take process really well, and they're more willing to allow their character to fail or to face complications, knowing that it's going to enrich the story.
Yeah, absolutely. And this game, the Cosmere RPG, this has been in the works for so long. You guys have been working on this system and this setting for the game. Lydia, you were announced as the lead writer way back in 2023. Do you want to talk just a little bit about like what goes into the process of making a game?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, we have been doing this for a while. And actually, one thing that I don't know if a lot of folks know is that I've actually been working with the core design team for most of my time on the project. So I'm heavily involved in mechanical design, which has been really fun too. But yeah, there's a lot that goes into it, like making sure the core mechanics were solid early on, and developing this Plotweaver system, the underlying system, and then figuring out, what do these flexible paths that people can take look like, and is multipathing something that we want to make really accessible? And the answer to that was yes, we do want to make it really accessible. Like what level of customization should characters be able to have? Like, how should we handle the treatment of different magic systems? That's a huge question. And how can we design the system to further support really cool stories being told? A lot of like magic system flexibility, where if you want to use your power but you're not sure like how to exactly use it, you're like, oh shoot, I don't have this very specific spell. It's like that's okay because you have a skill for this magic system, so you can just like figure out a cool way and work with the GM to figure out like what that looks like. So there's a lot of things that go into it, and there was a lot of consideration for like how can we make this accessible to people who don't play RPGs yet, to people who have only played like really big name RPGs? How can we make it its own thing, to where it's like best going to support the types of stories people want it to tell and have a truly like curated experience that feels very like Cosmere relevant. So there's just a ton that goes into that. And now that we have the core system established, we're able to actually go in, and for future settings such as Mistborn, which we're fairly deep into development on, we're able to like really say, okay, these, our game for Stormlight and Mistborn it's going to be fully compatible, and but like what are the differences, for each one? Like how do these, different magic systems behave? Things like that have been really fun to explore.
Yeah, I think that there are already a lot of resources that can break down the mechanics. And I'm going to give a shameless plug here to a web series that I am working on and have been working on, the Shard of Opportunity. We're going to be doing playthroughs of the Stonewalkers as well as homebrew campaigns, maybe some one shots and all that stuff. But they just did and have recently released, depending again when you are listening to this, an interview with Johnny O'Neill that does kind of go through some of the mechanics of what does the plot die do, how do the talent trees work. So I know that there might be a lot of people who just want those very nice breakdowns. I'm going to say I'll provide other resources for those types of things, because what I would love to get from both of you is that perspective on the story and kind of what it is like to make a story inside of an existing story world as part of a cooperation with Brandon Sanderson and the team at Dragonsteel. And so, Lyla, could you maybe just give us like a 2-minute pitch, an elevator pitch for Stonewalkers, which is the first campaign in the Stormlight setting of the Cosmere RPG? Like, what
I just want to interject really quick for our audience who might not be like super familiar, because we've talked a little bit about how in an RPG you're kind of improvising a story with your group, but there are also some stories that are provided for you by the wonderful people at Brotherwise. So if you're new, whether as a player or as a GM, and the idea of just coming up with a story off the top of your head sounds really intimidating, there are resources. And one of those stories is the Stonewalkers campaign. Yeah, Lyla, if you want to just give us your quick little pitch for this story that folks can play through.
Yeah, that was a great introduction and just like a thing to sort of disambiguate. Okay, so Stonewalkers. So in Stonewalkers, you get to tell the story of what happened to Town's honor blade and how it ended up in Shidavar. The Stormlight Archives kind of left this curious gap where Town has his blade when he first sort of appears on camera in the books, and then he's transported to the war camps. And by the time he gets there, the shard blade is different, and it's a dead shard blade, and he doesn't have the same blade. So it's sort of like what happened. And then later, the blade is in Shidavar. I think that the thing that's really unique and interesting about this particular story and project that we worked on is because it was done in such close connection with Dragonsteel. Dan Wells and Brandon Sanderson actually like pitched, and Dan wrote the outline for it. We get to basically place you as the group of characters that answer that question. And because it's a role-playing game, there's a level of flexibility in that, like, the decisions your characters make come up, create the story of what, that is. So it's going to be a little bit different for every group as to the sequence of events of how that happens. But yeah, that's what you get to play through. And that is my pitch.
I think it's a great one and a strong one. I am curious, what do you think are the benefits and maybe the challenges of creating a game around an existing story compared to something completely from scratch, or, completely from Brotherwise's own creation? We'll start over with Lyla, and then Lydia, if you have some additional thoughts on that aspect, I would love to hear from you as well.
Yeah. So one of the other members on the team, Andrew Fisher, like had done a bunch of work in sort of the Star Wars IP and just talked about like what a gift it was to be able to place a story that is like so canonically like sort of central. Like a lot of times you don't want to mess with the canon because it will become like an IP nightmare of like, trying to figure out if you're allowed to use various characters and things. And so to get sort of like permission and some actual like behind the scenes assistance and like being able to do that was really special. So we are not setting this in, Thelena at some, time, or we're not playing during the Desolations. Like, we're not playing during some time period that doesn't have a bunch of stuff written about it. We're playing about a time period that has a lot of canonical characters and events and things that are going on. So I think from one perspective, like, there's the saying that constraints, kind of feed into creativity, and we had like a lot of constraints. I think for the, my job as the book lead was coordinating, like, I wrote one of the chapters, or I like helped out with one of the chapters of like the introduction. But I was also coordinating the team that were writing the rest of the chapters. And they basically took what was, maybe a half page of outline and fleshed that into, a 8,000, 10,000 word chapter for you to play through. So there's a lot of, additional like characters and just like combats and conversations and other like play scenarios that were, kind of came out of that. But all of this is to say that like a very real thing that we ran into was canonical timing.
Mhm.
One of the things from the beginning that we really wanted to do was not have you sort of stuck in a particular location, and for you to get the experience of like kind of traveling across Roshar and experiencing major events in all of the different like cultures and nations of Roshar. And so there was actually a thing that happened where early drafts of the adventure, if folks in this room were playtesting it, actually had Nightblood in it. And
Whoa.
yeah, which was like a big thing. And so we had done some, without getting too much into it, we had done some design around that, and it had been out through playtesting. And Karen Alstrom, who is Sanderson's continuity editor, actually hugely helpful, sort of came in, and there was a period of time when myself, but also Johnny and Karen were having like deep conversations about how long it takes to travel via various methods. Okay, if if Skybreaker picks you up and like flies you somewhere, like, how fast can that be, and like the physical constraints of like how fast you can move, and some calculations, around that. So that was like a very specific case where it's like, oh, we see in this case it was like the Everstorm on camera and like town being in the war camps, that those have particular times, and then we're moving past a certain amount of space, like this actually isn't possible. So that that was a I guess sort of painful moment, just because we had to change some things in the story where we realized like the constraints do affect us very yeah. But for the most part, I think it was basically like, again, you get a half a paragraph of kind of where the characters come in and where the characters go out, and some canon characters that they might interact with a chapter, and like some basic bones, and then the writers fleshed it out really lovely with places, locations, and cool choices and things that you need to do within each of the chapters.
Lydia, did you think that there were any kind of other specific benefits or challenges to kind of writing within this existing story world?
My experience has been in the past working on established IPs. And so I always see it as a fun challenge to just really deep dive and do a ton of research and study it, like as if I, were studying like an ancient civilization or something like that.
We love
So it's
that.
really,
That's what we do here.
yeah, it's like so interesting to my brain to just go on a deep dive. And then probably like one of the coolest experiences of my career is just getting to go to narrative meetings at Dragonsteel. So getting to like sit down with Brandon, Dan, and Isaac and just pick their brains about places that we haven't seen very much of. That was super cool. And if you pick up the Stormlight World Guide, you'll be able to learn a lot more about interesting places like the Horneater Peaks or Herdaz, like places where we see or we learn a little bit about them in the books, but we don't really like get to have a lot of time being there, And so
Yeah.
there's a
Yeah,
lot
yeah.
more cool things you can learn, which I feel like is important for being able to tell stories across Roshar. It's like you have to know what these places are like. And then my very favorite part of that was exploring more with the Azish Empire and the different nation states there. Places like Steen, Alm, Desh, places we haven't seen very much of. So again, like very much to what Lyla said, I think it was more fun than anything else. Like there were some times where you're knee deep, you're like 45 minutes into a copper mine slash book search slash like words of Brandon rabbit hole. And
Yeah.
you're like, no, I thought I understood this 20 minutes in, but
Yeah.
everything I know is a lie. And so there's
We've
these
been
funny
there. We
moments.
felt those positions.
We've been there
Yeah,
so many times.
for sure.
I want to say, like, hats off to you for having those constraints, but then also like honoring those constraints. I could imagine we will say maybe some other unnamed IPs that they got to the question of like, how do you travel from the south to the north? And they just went, we don't care. Like the plot's just going to jump to the north, and all of a sudden the dragons are going to be there. Ahem, excuse me. But like that type of honoring of the source material, I think does help the overall buy-in from so many readers who probably do not have a heavy background in playing RPGs, but now they can just like know with certainty, like, oh, the team put in the effort to understand these things, which then allows me to like kind of freely move throughout the world.
Going on these research deep dives and whatnot and really honoring what the fans like has been easier because we're fans ourselves. And so like the research is fun for us, like it's nice that we get paid to do it, but
Yeah.
it's fun for us. And so, we very much have these fan instincts in ourselves of like, what do we want to see? What do we want to go be able to do? And I think that is really helpful, whether it's reading the World Guide or whether it's reading Stonewalkers that the adventure team wrote. It's like, people working on that would just be like, what would I want my character to do in the situation? Or which parts of Roshar do I want to see?
I also want to give a quick shout out. So we have a group of folks on our Discord server called the World Singers, who are like major Brandon Sanderson like community members and Cosmere nerds. And so they've been, all of our writers do these sort of deep dive rabbit hole, things. They're fans, but we also have, big community name fans that are like getting early access and answering questions of like, what color was nails, whatever, on the server and helping out. So just a huge shout out to them. It's been really cool to have them be part of the process.
And in addition to the Stonewalkers campaign, there are a few other stories that folks will be able to have access to. I think there's a couple that are currently available, and then there are a few that were added as part of a kind of tariff relief package, extra stories that people could purchase to sort of offset some of the tariff costs. Lyla, do you want to give us just a quick overview of what other stories people have the opportunity to engage in?
Yeah, so besides Stonewalkers, and Lydia should pipe in if I miss anything, because I kind of just jotted these down. So one of the big ones is the first step, which was it is basically, I described it as like part personality test, part game tutorial, and then also part just like an introduction to what RPGs are.
Cool.
So yeah, it's this really interesting like mesh of different things. Sen Pung Lim and Merrick Moore designed it together, and it is meant to teach you the game, but also while you are kind of playing a pared down version of the game where you learn, more rules as you go along, you also make your characters make decisions, and via them making decisions, that's kind of where the personality test part comes in. It tells you, oh, maybe you want to take these particular skills, or maybe you're sort of tending towards this particular, order of Knight Radiant, or maybe you're tending towards this particular, kind of path talent tree. And so I think that that's, a fun way to kind of dip your toes in. And we also built it so that the story connects to Stonewalkers. So you play this thing.
Cool.
Yeah, it can be kind of like a prologue, and you can take the characters that you sort of design, not just sitting there, filling in a character sheet, but like while playing through a game, into the later game. So that's the first step. There's also a solo version of that that's also going to be coming out. We also have Bridge 9, which was available during sort of the beta period, so various folks got to play through it. We've also run it at a bunch of our conventions. I think it's probably the adventure that's been run the most, and it's a very solid level 1 adventure. It jumps straight into the action. I don't know if I really want to like spoil sort of what kicks off the story, but you play as part of a bridge crew, and you're in the Shattered Plains. So it is very like tropey, classic Stormlight Archive, and you definitely get to kind of see the, we're trying to show off the parts of the books that most people are familiar with and we get excited about. So, and that's also kind of built to be a tutorial. Like there's a little bit more hand holding as you play through it, teaching you as the GM even like how to get used to the rules of the system. And then as mentioned, I'm probably going to goof up the name, but there's like a summer sale basically going on for a couple of extra things, which includes both of the Chasm Fiends, but also an adventure called Speak the Words. This adventure was designed by Johnny, who's our creative lead, but also Whitney, a very talented writer on our team. And it's meant, it is part of a kit that was given out to retailers for them to like sort of demo the Stormblight archive. So or the Cosmere RPG, it's meant to only take like a couple hours to play through because it's sort of meant to be played in that setting. Also, sort of like an intro adventure, but you get to play level 3 characters, and the goal is to get some people speaking the words, like during the adventure.
Yeah.
Its core premise is that there's a decision you make early on, which kind of says whether you're going for one radiant path or the other. Like, which one do you care more about? What do you want to protect or fight for more? It's a war story, and again, should take about 3 hours at the table, and is really cool play. All of these come with maps and character art and like tokens and things. So they're very immersive, like art wise. And I think that's what we have, unless Lydia pipes in with any other adventure content that I
Yeah,
missed.
Lydia, anything to add?
Just to add quickly a plug for Chasm Fiend, in case anyone doesn't know what that is. Chasm Fiend is the RPG team's magazine for the Cosmere RPG. So it's like this beautiful full color magazine where you can learn more about, the game and its development. And sometimes we have fun little extras in there. Oftentimes, like, we'll include a little adventure in there. So there's like a little adventure included. And it's just a beautiful magazine, and it's a ton of fun. Like, it really helps you just kind of like get into the spirit of the game and learn a ton of fun little nuggets that we added there that you might not get from just reading the books alone.
Yeah, I love that. I love that there are so many entry points to the game. As you were going through all of those different stories, Lyla, again, as like a person very new to RPGs who on some level felt like, oh, maybe this like isn't for me. It's just been so reassuring and refreshing to come into the Cosmere RPG knowing that it has in a lot of ways really been like engineered, designed for people like me who are like, I'm a huge fan of the Cosmere and I've never done an RPG before and I'm kind of scared, but there are so many really great entry points to make it accessible for folks, and I really appreciate that, so thank you.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to say, like, if you like the Cosmere, if you're reading the books, it's like, we know that you like these stories. We know that
Yeah.
you get something out of them. And I think the jump to grabbing a bunch of friends and like, being a little bit more creative and kind of weirdly vulnerable in that way, where you're creating something with like other people, can be really intimidating if you haven't done it before. But as somebody who's been doing this since like middle school, it is so much fun. And it really like makes me happy to hear that like our attempts to like kind of bridge that gap, because like, again, pick one of these up, give it a try. You might find a new hobby that you really love, and it's a hobby that you can share with friends. And I just love role-playing games.
Yeah, and that's what we're all here to celebrate. I will say that I've certainly will recommend Bridge 9 as kind of that entry point that anybody can join up with. I've played Bridge 9 so many times now, it's ridiculous. Like as a PC, as a GM, it's just the thing that I recommend everybody to do. And then like after I got to play through it, I was just like, you get your friends, I will GM and bring people, and then they go out and become GMs who like are then replicating. So it is spreading slowly. But if someone is looking for an entry point, they don't yet have the Stonewalkers campaign, or they're like on the fence or something, I do think Bridge 9 is all that you need. And if you incorporate some of these other ones as well, it's like just such a wealth of fun times that you can have. But now let's get a little nerdy. Let's talk in depth a little bit about the things that the characters will be doing, because the Plotweaver system, as we talked about, is going to be applying to all of the Cosmere RPG settings. But one of the interesting aspects are the heroic paths that you will start with as a character. And these heroic paths, I believe there's 6 designed for each setting, and they might change setting to setting. I don't know enough about the future and kind of what the plans are, but they maybe could be compared to D&D classes. And what I find so interesting is that it's far more flexible than the traditional D&D systems. And so, Lydia, could you kind of walk us through a little bit what the goals are for characters selecting these heroic paths, and kind of what the vision is when it comes to someone being a scholar, but then maybe gaining some warrior skills and blending through the different heroic paths as well.
For sure. Yeah. So our heroic paths, we do have 6 of them. They are agent, envoy, hunter, leader, scholar, and warrior. And those will be consistent across all of the Cosmere RPG settings. So we have all of those same paths, but then what's different is the specialties within a path.
Got it.
So for our handbooks, we'll offer 3 specialties for each path. And so some of them will be the same across Stormlight and Mistborn, and you'll see that when Mistborn comes out, but we'll have ones unique to the setting. So some will switch out, such as Artifabrian and Shardbearer. Like those are clearly very Rosharan. Then in Mistborn, we have fun ones like Gunslinger or Haze Killer. And so there's a lot of,
Cool.
yeah, there's like an exciting interpretation. So the heroic paths, typically you'll choose one during character creation and kind of enter that path. Each path has a key talent, and so you take that talent in order to enter the path. And then after that, you can go into the various specialties and you can dip into one specialty and then another without penalty. So it's really cool for that. And then really the only barrier to entry for these heroic paths for multipathing is getting that key talent. And so the key talents are also very useful. So it's really easy to multipath. And sometimes when I'm building characters to playtest with, I will just like dip into quite a few heroic paths to just grab like a neat little key talent from one or another. And we see the characters in the Stormlight Archive, they have so many different skill sets. And oftentimes they would be taking talents from these various paths and specialties if they were a character in our system. And so we wanted to honor that and really make sure that there wasn't like a heavy barrier to entry and people could create highly customized characters with highly specific skill sets, and mix and match in really interesting ways. So that's one of my favorite things about the system is just flexible paths and, the fun specialties you'll see from different worlds.
And Lyla, what do you think?
Yeah, I just wanted to jump off what Lydia was saying because I think that she mentioned this, but I want to stress it. So there are these sort of like classic builds which the design team have put together that actually instruct you like, hey, put your stats in this skill, choose these talents, and they are recommendations for somebody who looks at all the customization and is like, I don't know what to do, but I want to build a character that's like Adolin in the books kind of thing.
A
Like
duelist, right?
the what?
A duelist, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I mean, but it also says grab from different tables basically, and tells you basically all of the different character creation options, like how you would do a build like that, and it's built by the design team, so you're not going to get in a position where you grab some talents that don't synergize well together and that sort of thing.
So just for example, if you wanted to play a Storm Warden, like we
Hmm.
have an iconic build to like tell you how to do that. So
Cool.
these aren't necessarily like, high level things. They're like more like niche, fun little things you see from the world. One I love that got cut that I totally understand, why we swapped it out, but Leoforin Clothier used to be like one of them, just like these
Yeah.
ridiculous, like
Oh, that's amazing.
niche things. We have so many great ones in there, so don't feel sad for that one. But yeah, we'll also do them for Mistborn. So it's just, if you're walking in and you have a new player who's like, this all intimidates me. I read the books 5 years ago. What do I do? You could like show them some cool iconic builds and then their character creation will be like a really easy and smooth process.
That's so cool. I love that your character can be so specific and so specific to the world as you're talking about like a storm warden. That's such a embedded like part of the culture of the world that is not necessarily super obvious, but like how cool that the thought was put in so that someone can be really anyone that exists in this world.
Yeah, because there are these named characters, and the characters that like people have tattoos of, or they say their wedding vows. In regards to Dalinar and Navani, present company being the main example here. I think that there's also these characters that are just mentioned from time to time, or like a Storm Warden. Like we don't have a named character that I can think of other than very briefly mentioned, like in a sentence or two. But it's a great aspect of system design that really a path can be followed that leads someone to those unexplored corners of Sanderson's world. And I'm curious if you said that one that got cut, the clothier that got cut, but what do you think is the most niche character that you've seen following the existing heroic paths, and just like what kind of existed
Ooh.
in the characters that you've kind of been seen being played in the playtesting?
Okay, in playtesting, I had one of my best friends from right at the beginning of playtesting, like 2 years ago, was like, I want to play an Azish Imperial Shard Blade. Like, I want to play that character. How do I make it happen? And I was like, yes, that's actually how we became friends. It's so funny. I was at one of Dan Wells' gaming retreats, which are so fun. I highly recommend them. Yeah, like she was just like, how do I do this? And I was like, okay, let's make your character. And so that was really fun. And but if you want like the deepest cut, like maybe the most niche of any of the iconic builds, I think it would be the Kaluk-i Iki, which is the Unkalaki Huntress.
Yes.
And
Ooh.
so like Rock mentions this word once, like I'm pretty sure it's just once in one of the books, making a joke to Kaladin or something like that. It's so niche. And then we're just like, cool. Brandon, tell us more about this. Like, And so, yeah, the iconic builds, we have some that are truly iconic, like very, like, much things you would remember from the books and want to make. But yeah, some of these are like deep cuts, like niche fan service. Like, again, just the team is extremely nerdy. We're huge fans. So, like, you just get these weird little, very niche things in the books. So we hope others enjoy that as much as we have.
Well, I want to already give a shout out because I know people are enjoying it. As I said, web series Shard of Opportunity. We have two separate characters that chose to be those female huntresses from the Horn Eater Peaks, and they're playing in the different campaigns that we have going on there. So like each campaign's going to have one of those hunters and warriors, and I think that's such a fun aspect of one word, one line turns into, for someone, an entire character, an entire backstory, and they're building this world and fleshing it out in a way that, like, I imagine, Leonardo da Vinci, he does like the outline of something, and then he has all his assistants come in and do like the deep shading and the detail work on that finished painting. And that's almost like what is going on with an RPG. Obviously, Brandon wrote something. The team at Brotherwise has expanded on that and provided more, but then the players are going to come in and provide that final bit of work. So hats off to you already for being so detailed. And I would love to kind of get a perspective on something that was mentioned regarding the future of the Cosmere RPG, because obviously an aspect that we all love about the Cosmere is that it's interconnected, and you have this promise, and it's starting to happen in more and more detail of like the worlds merging together. And so to you, what is the most exciting power or magic system that you want to see combined? What power systems do you want to start blending together? We'll start over with Lyla. What kind of excites you in that realm?
All right. So we actually had like a team retreat where some of these discussions and things were coming up. So I am making my way through the Cosmere. So there's probably some that I haven't hit yet, but I really liked the soul stamping.
Yes.
Yeah, that seemed just like a super cool thing to be playing around with. There's something about like awakening too that like kind of feels maybe a little bit like programming, which I think could like end with some, I don't know, interesting sort of like summoning and creating things going on with that. So yeah, but there was a lot of cool discussion happening there about how well the realities of how we get all these things to work together, and then also the different toys and things that we can play with.
Yeah. Have both of you read Tress of the Emerald Sea?
I just finished it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because the tablet that
Yeah.
Fort uses is said to have awakened mechanics within. So yeah, I definitely think you're on the right path there with a little bit of like programming. And Brandon has said specifically about soul stamping, and to a more specific degree, like the Elantrian powers have some programming as his mental background of like how he built up those systems. It's certainly going to be fun to experience those worlds colliding. And I want to know, Lydia, from your perspective as like the designer and kind of like keeping all of these mechanics in your brain, things get very complicated very quickly because we just talked about the heroic paths. But of course, there's radiant paths as well. I think that all 10 radiant paths are available, and they have, as you were describing, their own tree. And so like you'll start with the heroic paths, but then some people might go over to the radiant path, and that's a new tree with new talents to explore and obviously unlock some new skills. Then you could think about jumping over to the Mistborn world with metals and allomancy and ferukami and hemalurgy. And then now we're talking about awakening and all of the other different magic systems. So tell me a little bit about the exciting aspects of all this potential when it comes to game mechanics, and also about the difficulty, because I imagine it's got to be stressful as well.
Yeah. Just to correct one thing real quick, we have all the different Radiant orders. You can play a Knight's Radiant from any of them except for Bondsmith. So
Got it.
that's the one where it's like we provide some lore on that, but it's still kind of behind the curtain. So all of the other ones we have great options for. The most exciting thing about being able to design for all of these various worlds and powers is probably like looking deeper into the underlying, parts of the Cosmere, like connection and identity and kind of how those factor in. Granted, that's really tricky
Yes.
and that's it gets very like finicky, and we don't have all the answers on like how all these different things function in depth in different situations. And so it is really cool to see, you can kind of see threads of the way something works in the Cosmere applied to, radiance, or applied to invested arts in different, worlds, and people use them, but in different ways. So that's really exciting and interesting. The challenge being that in any RPG, if you want to kind of control complexity and have something not get too complex, you have to really focus on design space and like where you're allocating it. And you can get really creative, which kind of like extends your design space well, but you have to really look at interactions, because if you're playing a Knight's Radiant who goes and over to Scadrial and gets a hemalurgic spike, it's like Spren don't necessarily love that, and there's just kind of all these interactions. Again, like we don't have 100% of all of the answers on how everything functions, but it can get kind of tricky. So not only in terms of the narrative and the story and the world building, but also in terms of the mechanics and the design space that different things take up, and not stepping on the toes of something else, making sure that you can combine interesting powers in a way that is satisfying. So like in Stormlight, we had it easier because you have Radiant orders who each have 2 surges, and a certain surge will only be shared by 2 orders. And so like
Right.
which combinations of the powers a character is going to have. Cool, that makes a ton of sense until you start. I guess you could mix honor blades into it, and then you
Yeah,
might
yeah.
get,
Yeah.
but like those are not standard, right? They're not standard. Most characters, won't just end up having an honor blade for the rest of their life. So once you get into other worlds, it's like, okay, you're mixing and matching powers. We have to be really cognizant that powers that should work together and
Mhm.
complement each other. And so, just the extent of powers we're designing across many worlds, that gets just very complex. It is fun. It is like solving a very complex puzzle, but it does take a lot of iteration, a lot of playtesting, and a lot of intentionality behind the base way that different powers work.
That's very interesting that you are like sort of describing this, how Stormlight is quite like formulaic already in the way that the powers work, and so that makes your job like a little bit easier. But then we have coming up second the Mistborn setting, which I think is maybe the most like flexible, where there's
Twinborn,
16, yeah, 16 different
spice.
powers. Like, how do they interact? And then you have Twinborn. And that sounds like
Medallions
a
in Era 2, which
nightmare.
like free up a lot of the restrictions that did exist in Era 1. Yeah, so it's certainly incredibly complicated and intricate puzzle that all of you have in front of you for the next many years to come as you keep bringing out different settings in the Cosmere RPG. I would love to jump over to just a little bit more of Lyla, your personal background, because you used to be a teacher, you did years in the Peace Corps, and I'm curious how like those experiences of creating lesson plans and just like being a classroom teacher kind of impacted your work or Stonewalkers specifically, and just kind of like how you bring forward your past into your writing today.
Yeah, I don't know. We were talking about soul stamping. I feel like I've had all these like weird different eras of my life. And each time I make a switch or I go to something else, there's like a thread that kind of like goes through from the last thing that I was doing. So it's been many years since I was in the Peace Corps, and I was classroom teaching there. And that's probably like one of the hardest jobs that I've had. Definitely had to be the most like on and present, I think. But yeah, I mean, all throughout college, I'd been like a big part of my life was TAing, and one of the last things I did was doing like curriculum planning for university like level courses, and they were always kind of like introductory computer science courses. Like the course that I planned was like introducing people who are in the social sciences into how they could use computers. And when I was in the Peace Corps in Rwanda, it was intro programming and getting people like specifically at all girls school, like excited about programming. And without just like rattling off my whole employment history, I think that as I was making the career jump into, doing stuff in the role-playing game space, it was very much like, well, I have very successfully at many different levels taught people how to do something. And, one of the threads throughout my life is I think that I really enjoy like designing a experience for somebody, because designing a lesson plan is designing experience, and you kind of have a goal with it. And I mean, maybe not all teachers think this, but like, when I'm designing curriculum or things, I want the person to be learning something, but also having like a fun time doing it and kind of motivated to keep going and not feel discouraged. And thinking about who you're communicating to and teaching them something or designing that experience is like directly applicable to, taking a new GM and teaching them how, or helping them like run a game for their players, which is like all the introductory adventure content that we're talking about. Like that is, but even if you get to something that like a pro GM is doing, you're still creating a tool and experience for them to, take their players through. So one of the things that was like so cool about coming in kind of earlier to the project, and maybe this is getting just like way too nerdy in the sort of instructional design space, is like there were not defined ways to talk about how to like on paper describe how a combat is like run in the system, or how conversations or endeavors are run in the system, which are two different types of scenes that you could run. So there's a little bit of just like a sort of like higher level of design of like, how do you, concisely and cleanly like write an NPC profile? Like what information are we going to, give for that, with a established system like D&D, they've already figured all that stuff out. Coming in and being able to kind of give an adventure style guide is sort of like internally what we call it, and what our ethos is around that was really cool.
That's perfect.
I love that. Oh my gosh. I feel like listening to people's career paths is often so interesting, because a lot of people have these kind of winding paths that do all connect, but maybe it's not like super clear immediately. But it totally makes sense to me that your background designing a curriculum and, like, as you said, teaching people how to do something, but like in a fun way, would be super helpful when it comes to a game like this. And I think all of my comments earlier in this conversation just like prove that work is evident.
Thank you. Yeah, I think my two things that I'll say is like, the RPG industry is really interesting. I have yet to meet somebody, well, maybe I just haven't asked the right questions, but I've yet to meet somebody who's like, hello, I went to like RPG design school.
Yeah.
I got a degree in this. Like, it's a lot of different, Lydia has her own very like interesting story about how she came to this. People bring in a lot of their past lives into this, and also there's just like a bunch of different interesting paths, I would say, if you ever meet designers and kind of like ask them what they did. And for anybody who's listening and like listened to this episode because they were like, I'm interested in game design, I guess the thing that I want to say is like, I had some formative experiences going to conventions and being like, oh, I'm seeing a game being play tested, like I could do that. I could get a bunch of index cards. Like, oh, some rules aren't working. Like, there's a really cool thing going on here. But also, this is not like, a polished like hardcover book. And so anyways, I think design is very approachable. Like, if you design a game, you pretty much make a PDF and put it up online and get people to play it. And like anybody could do that. So game design is very cool.
Yeah, I think that that's on display, and your passion is on display as well. Lydia, There was the mention of kind of like the 3 breakdowns of combat, conversations, endeavors that
Mhm.
exist within the Cosmere RPG. Could you talk a little bit about that and what you've mentioned previously about how you want your game design to kind of reflect a commitment to inclusivity as well as player choice? And like, how is that represented through those mechanics? Maybe a little bit more on like the conversation and the endeavor side. Obviously, combat makes sense for a lot of people, and it's the most well-known portion, but could you explain those other 2 a little bit?
Absolutely. And to explain this, I think it's important to just look at heroic paths really quickly. So, like, you can have, characters that you wouldn't typically think being relevant in combat, such as envoys and scholars there. They can still be doing meaningful things in combat. And so, we wanted to make sure that everybody had a place in any scene type. And so, whether it's a like warrior being able to intimidate people in a conversation, or like however they want to go about what they're trying to do. We have really neat talents that can help characters to feel like they have a place, or the players to feel like their characters have a place in all the scene types. And for player choice, it's really like, how would your character approach this situation? We see, in the Stormlight Archive, we see a lot of characters make non-standard choices, kind of go against the grain. And so in these different scene types, you can figure out interesting ways for your character to be relevant. And, conversations, we kind of play with focus. It's very much like kind of just this give and take, but our focus resource kind of comes into play. There are different ways to, have your enemy like spend focus and then kind of wear them down over time. In endeavors, it's really interesting because there are these more kind of flexible scenes where you're looking at a threshold of successes and failures for skill tests. And so you can anything you can think of that your GM will allow, like any type of contribution you can think of that might even be like a little bit strange. If your character can think of it and it is, helpful to progressing the plot or trying to reach your objective, then like yeah, do that, and so there's just a lot of flexibility, a lot of player choice in playing whatever type of character you want and still having them be a meaningful part of the story. Because even if your character isn't the person on the front line fighting a battle, if they give a very inspirational speech before that like hypes everybody up, like you can legit have hype character energy and then just kind of drive with that. So player choice, I think it's just really like, do the mechanics, does the game system and like the way the game is ran, like does that allow for you to do non-standard things, to have a lot of flexibility? And then for inclusivity, we have safety guides included in our books. And besides safety tools, we also try to give some recommendations on how to get the most out of your game. And with games that have some kind of heavy themes, like in Stormlight, we have slavery. There's kind of 2 schools of thought in RPG design, like 2 main ones, where it's like, one, you can opt for erasure. You can say, this doesn't exist here actually in this game. And so we're just not going to touch that. Or there's this other method of like, how can we prepare players to approach these difficult topics with a genuine desire to like do them, justice, and to make space for harm that's being done and addressing it, like to address the harm. And so we very much said, this doesn't make sense as a world where you snap your fingers and, these things don't exist, like with singers especially, like
Yeah.
Of course.
you cannot have a game that's true to the IP and just say singers are fine. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Like that would absolutely not be the right choice. And so instead, what we did was make sure that make sure that empowerment is included in the way we design singers and the way we talk about them throughout, like the handbook, the world guide, and the adventure. Like everywhere, the way that we talk about them, it's like it sounds weird, but are we humanizing them? Are we like
Yeah.
giving them are we treating them like people essentially with
Yeah.
equal consideration to humans? And so we had that baked in from the beginning, like ground level. And then our safety guide also has things like a section on including marginalization responsibly. It's like, how do you include this in your game? How do you have these tough conversations if your group wants to? Like, what can you do to make sure that this is a safe space where these really, like powerful discussions can be had? How do you handle it if, and like, first of all, do you want an NPC or another character to potentially be introducing some of this into the game? And if you do, how can we all work together to make sure that that is a good experience for everyone at the table and doesn't draw in any issues? Or
Yeah.
yeah, how can we make sure that this is treated in a way that's like conducive to good understanding and empathy and forward movement.
I think that's really powerful and wonderful to hear. I always think that when it comes to Rashar specifically, it's such a unique world because we join the human sides, we join Kaladin, and of course they're fighting a mysterious enemy that's basically like nightmares. And they're used as nightmares to like scare children and be like, the Voidbringers are coming and they're they're going to snatch up your kids if you go out late at night, all of this stuff. And then the reversal that comes around Oathbringer, that the humans are the foreigners to this planet, which of course makes sense, it's a planet for crabs. And the singers are the native people. And then that dynamic plays out where we go from seeing most of the Parshendi in Way of Kings as the villains. And I think at the time I honestly like barely thought of them as humanoid people. Like they were very alien, like the Predator or something. They were kind of just like not even human. And then by the time we get to Wind and Truth, one of the relationships that I love more than anything is Renarin and Relaine, and like seeing that play out. And so it has definitely been a journey to go on as a reader, and you can also experience that as a player now. And so that's really great to hear that it's been incorporated into the story. I want to thank you both so much for your time here today. Also, obviously, your time working on the Cosmere RPG and the Stonewalker campaign. We have a quick couple of think of them as rapid fire questions for you from some of our patrons. We'll just kind of go through these very quickly and then wrap it up here.
Yeah, I want to start with a question from Catherine. Has there been any thoughts about doing a solo mode for the Cosmere RPG, or like a solo campaign that people could just play on their own?
You'll have more to say. So coming out, I mentioned the first step. So the first step has a solo mode, which will be our sort of first published foray into providing solo materials. And then I'm going to hand it over to Lydia to talk about other things.
Yeah, we do have a solo mode for the Cosmere RPG in development. I don't know how much I can say about it, so I'll just be very tight-lipped. But the designers working on that have a very impressive background working on the solo modes for a lot of really fantastic RPGs. So we're really excited about the direction that that's going to go in. And we totally get it when people say, I really want to play this RPG, but how am I going to get a group together? Like getting adults together to play an RPG once a week or once every 2 weeks or whatever is seriously like herding cats. It is so hard because everyone's so busy. And so, whether it's because you can't get a group together or because you really like this relaxing, introspective, fun experience of just sitting down and calmly kind of, tackling an RPG by yourself, whatever the reason is, we're really excited to offer that with the Cosmere RPG. And like Lyla said, we have a great way to kind of get started in that.
Now, we can cut this if need be, but would you let us know if that potential solo mode is in the Stormlight setting or is it on another planet?
It's going to be for the Cosmere RPG as a whole.
Perfect. And you don't need to say anything else about it if you don't we can keep it right there. That's perfect. Another one of our patrons named Irving wanted to know, what's the favorite thing that you contributed to the Stonewalker campaign or just this first setting? And what's one thing that was left on the cutting room floor? Lyla, love to start with you.
So Stonewalkers has some session zero guidance that has a kind of character backstory exercise where you get to ask other players questions and kind of develop character connections. This was something that was added somewhat late in the game by me just being like, hey, I really don't like those stories where people don't really seem to know each other and you just come into a bar and have a conversation and suddenly you're bosom buddies with the world, fighting you.
Of course.
And so I think there's definitely a lot more that GMs could build on top of that, and you can also play through the first step. But that was something that we added, and also connections into the story itself. There's a character Tazo that is pretty critical in the first chapter that we do in a session zero some backstory building with him and the goals system of the Cosmere RPG. So that was one of the things I'm glad that we kind of got to that made it in. And we're doing sort of more of that stuff, I would say, with Mistborn Legacy at the moment. So I'm excited to get more kind of flashbacky characters, sort of internal monologue-y type stuff as we keep going, because a lot of these, I mean, Stormlight especially, like you're doing basically like character arcs that then get mechanized with swearing ideals and stuff. So it's kind of important to hear what's going on in characters' heads, I think. Yes. And then the cutting room floor was the other one.
Yeah, just something that like you had been and got cut.
Yeah, so I think I mentioned Nightblood. I think another thing that ended up happening is that we ended up having there's a boat captain in Cecil X Dar that we had like a little bit more content for, but because of swapping around of things, that gets like a little bit less screen time there. But yeah, part of the thing was I came in halfway through the writing of Stonewalkers, so I was the one doing a lot of cutting, I think, of
Got it.
of
So
stuff.
you loved the
You
cutting
had to
process.
come in and be the bummer.
Well, now that we're in like legacy, I think, and we're getting like playtester feedback and stuff, I think that there's going to be some killing of darlings, as they say, that'll be a little bit more painful. But
yeah, of course.
And Lydia, how about you?
For me, I'm going to speak more broadly because I worked on the handbook and world guide. I didn't really work much on Stonewalkers, so I'll just kind of speak to those two books. My favorite thing that we did was the Radiant key talents. So each order has a key talent that's pretty much the same. Granted, it's curated to the specific order, but it's the first ideal and it gives you a goal to speak the words. And so you're working toward this goal that has like these 3 different steps to it. And whenever you fulfill that goal in gameplay, you get to speak the words in scene, like if you want to, which is really cool. So again, like when we're talking about how the RPG is designed to create these really cool moments for each character, like this is one of them for Radiant characters. They can speak the words in scene. And then like you get this amazing rush of power, you get full access to your surges, and like everything is really cool. And this is like my favorite part of gameplay, is just seeing people like speak the words. And sometimes people at a table will get kind of emotional, like listen, we're
Yeah.
nerds, don't judge. But there have been some really cool moments with that, and you just get this rush of power, and it's really cool. So that's my favorite thing that we did. It was like really solving this difficult issue of like, how do we treat ideals, and like if people take a talent, do they immediately get power, and like how do we figure this out, like. And so that was kind of a challenge we had in design, and then I loved where it came out, where we have this goal, and then the reward is speaking the ideal and the power that comes with that. And then the sad things that got left on the cutting room floor, I think I've already lamented sufficiently about Leah and Clothier, so I will leave that one where it is. But another idea that didn't fully make it was Spren GM. I had this silly idea where you have your GM, and like sometimes, like you're playing with somebody who doesn't really want to get deep into the RPG, like they
Of
don't want
course.
to like read a full handbook. So like my partner will happily play RPGs, but not maybe dig super deep all the time. And that's okay. But Spren GM was a way for somebody to just kind of roll up, have a sheet, a little like sheet of every Spren at the table, and their name and their personality and what type of Spren they were, and then just interject throughout the game with like
Perfect. Oh my
Spren
gosh.
things.
I
So
love that.
silly.
Oh, that's
Totally
amazing.
understand like why I didn't make it. And then I do really love where we ended up with Spren, where it's this collaborative role playing where the GM sometimes will interject with like a little Spren message, and then sometimes the player might also control their own Spren. And so there's this cool collaborative work between the GM and the player whose character has a bond with the Spren. And I'm really happy with where that ended up. But part of me, in the beginning, just so desperately wanted to just be able to hand a silly sheet of paper to somebody who just showed up to like hang out and eat snacks and just say, here you go.
That's
I love that. I love that we're having that in this forum now so that people can take that into their home brews if they want
It
to.
can live
Exactly.
on.
It can
Spren
live
GM will
on.
live on in our hearts.
Yes.
honestly some of the most fun that I've had as a GM is when I just cut to be a Spren. I have pattern Lightweaver Spren that just gets to do slow movements all around and buzz, but that's certainly a little bit of acting that gets to come in whenever I get to do the Spren.
Cryptics are so fun for that.
Yeah, exactly. I want to wrap this up, maybe talking about the Radiance, and this can literally just be the final thing. A quick question to each of you: what is your favorite radiant ability that is on one of these talent trees? Lyla, what do you think?
Oh, like the actual talent?
The actual talent, if you happen to know it or
I
have
don't
it.
know. So I don't have a talent name for you,
Okay.
but there are talents in the Surge of Transformation, which have led to scenarios in like playtest reports that I have read where somebody soul cast a gate into Focaccia. In our internal test, there was somebody using transformation to like turn things into cheese during the final battle.
Yeah.
Love it.
And Lydia has an infamous moment where she soul cast something into
Oh
either
no.
corn or meat. Yeah, so I think that's been a one that's generated some fun stories.
Fantastic. And Lydia, what about you? Favorite radiant ability or talent?
You know it's gonna come from Elsecaller. I can't help it.
Has to.
I really like Realmic Evasion, which
Yeah.
is a reaction you can use to like half blip yourself to Shadesmar and like, just avoid an attack. And it's just like a fun little imagery in my mind to just kind of be like blip, and then you're still there. Like it's just a snap of your fingers, like a little trick of the eye almost, but you like can, avoid a little attack.
Yeah, that's for those opening up the world book for the first time, that's relatively early in the L Scholar talent tree as well. So you get to use that one pretty early on as soon as you become a Radiant. I think that this is it. I could talk to you a lot more about the Cosmere RPG. It's obviously something that we are very devoted to, the Cosmere here, and listening to other nerds talk about what they're passionate about, and just this very cool thing that you have created and provided the opportunity for so many other great stories, whether it's speaking that first ideal or having these deep character moments that we see and love in the Stormlight Archive. Now they can happen around your table or virtually, if that's the way that you happen to play. So thank you both for all of the time you've given today. And we want to give a couple of shout outs because if this is going out on launch day and people are listening to it immediately, there is a Discord event going on the official Cosmere RPG Discord server. It is happening Friday, July 25th. The time is at 11 a.m. Pacific time. And if it's okay with Brotherwise, I will put a link to that server in the show notes so you can go check that out right now. We also have the World Hopper Ball reunion live stream coming this Saturday. We're going to be talking to a bunch of the cast from last year's World Hopper Ball. That's going to be on July 26th at 1 p.m. Pacific time. That's going to be on YouTube. And we just want to thank both of you. Thank all of the listeners, especially people who have been rating for Brooke and I's birthday. It's very close now to the actual dates of our birth. And so thank you to everyone who's followed along this fun journey. And Brooke, could you take us away?
Until next time, life before death.
Strength before weakness.
Journey before destination.